Welcome, my friend. You found your way to a quiet place tonight. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to fix, nowhere you need to go. Let your shoulders soften just a little. Let your jaw unclench. Take a slow breath in and let it fall out gently. Just let the day slowly fade behind you. You can listen, or simply let the sound rest in the background. Either way is perfectly fine. When you're ready, we'll begin a gentle story, meant for calm, for comfort, and for overthinking minds ready to rest. There is a quiet kind of evening that arrives almost unnoticed. It doesn't rush in. It doesn't demand attention. It simply settles, the way a soft blanket drapes across tired shoulders, steady and familiar. Tonight is one of those evenings. Outside, the night stretches calmly across the rooftops of a small town, where narrow cobbled streets wind gently toward the distant hills. Lamps glow softly along the lanes, each one wrapped in a halo of golden mist, and the world seems to exhale, as if everything, everywhere, has finally decided it is all right to rest. Above one of those lamplit streets sits a loft tucked beneath wooden eaves, its window half open to the slow night air. From within, a warm glow flickers, steady, patient, and rhythmically alive. It is the light of candles, each flame breathing its quiet language into the dusk. The loft belongs to the candlecarver, not a factory maker, not a hurried craftsman, but someone who believes candles are meant to be small vessels of memory, each one shaped thoughtfully, each one touched with care, each one meant to burn gently beside someone who needs a soft place to land their thoughts. The inside of the loft feels like a sanctuary made from quiet gestures. Wooden shelves line the slanted walls, filled with neatly arranged wax molds, smooth carving tools, tiny jars of essential oils, and ribbons of parchment tags. On the central work table lies a collection of candles at different stages, some freshly poured, some being carved, some cooling beneath linen cloths, and everywhere there is light, not bright, insistent light, but a calm, amber radiance that rests on the grain of the wood, curls softly around the edges of old books, and lifts like a gentle tide up to the beams overhead. The flames move slowly, bowing and rising, as if listening to a song the night itself is humming. A faint scent drifts through the room. Beeswax warmed by time, notes of lavender, soothing traces of cedar, and the sweet whisper of honey left behind by summer. With every breath, the air feels less heavy. With every breath, the mind feels less busy. Here, thoughts are not scolded into silence. They are simply allowed to soften, like snow melting back into water. The candlecarver knows that the world can be loud even when the room is silent. Thoughts loop, worries replay, conversations linger long after they've ended. But in this loft, the rhythm of shaping wax and shaping calm become the same gentle ritual. Everything slows, politely, gracefully, kindly. The loft doesn't chase sleep. It simply creates space where sleep feels welcome to arrive. And as the night deepens beyond the window, the flicker of light spills outward faintly, resting across the rooftops like a promise. Tonight will be gentle. Here, nothing rushes, nothing presses, nothing needs fixing. Only soft light, soft air, and the slow, steady company of a craft made for comfort. And as the candle carver lifts a small block of cooling wax and sets it onto the workbench, the night truly begins. Night settles deeper across the town, and the last hints of daylight fade into a faint memory along the horizon. Above the narrow street, the loft rests like a gentle lantern itself, warm, patient, and entirely unhurried. Inside, the candlecarver moves with the kind of slowness that isn't clumsy or tired, but intentional. A slowness shaped over years of learning that peaceful work cannot be rushed. Every gesture carries quiet understanding. Every pause seems to speak. On the workbench lies a piece of creamy beeswax, slightly translucent, as if holding traces of summer sunlight deep inside. The candlecarver runs a thumb along its surface, feeling the softness, the coolness, the subtle promise of what it will soon become. Candles in this loft are not merely objects. They are invitations to breathe differently, to listen more gently, to soften the harsh edges of the day. The first carving of the evening begins, the blade gliding carefully down the wax, shaving a paper, thin curl that spirals to the tabletop. The faint sound of carving is soothing, a soft, whispering scrape, steady and rhythmic. It echoes inside the loft like a lullaby made of craftsmanship. Between each careful stroke, the candlecarver pauses, not because of uncertainty, but because the pauses matter. Pauses let the flicker of the flame beside the workbench be noticed. They let the scent of beeswax drift upward. They give the carver's thoughts the same gentle treatment the candles receive. For a long moment, the candlecarver simply listens. The rafters creak softly as the wood relaxes in the cool night air. Somewhere beyond the open window, leaves rustle, brushing against each other with the smallest sigh. An old clock on the far shelf ticks quietly, not counting time, simply acknowledging it. Nothing in this room hurries, and slowly, the mind doesn't either. Across from the worktable hangs a framed sketch pinned to the beam. A simple charcoal drawing of a lantern sitting on a windowsill, its flame leaning toward the glass. The edges of the drawing are worn, as if touched often. It is the emotional center of this loft, not dramatic, not tragic, simply meaningful. The drawing had been made years ago by someone who once loved quiet nights, just like this one. someone who believed that light, even a very small one, can keep a person company in ways words cannot. The candle carver doesn't think about the memory in sharp detail anymore. Instead, it exists like the warm glow in the corner of a room, not demanding attention, but always there, comforting, gentle. Part of why the loft is what it is. Another curl of wax falls, another soft line carved. The candle is being shaped into a tall, slender column with delicately patterned sides, tiny flowing waves etched along its length. They look like the calm motion of water at night. When eventually lit, the carved waves will cast shadows that move slowly across walls, turning stillness into something softly alive. On a nearby shelf rest dozens of finished candles, each one unique, some carved with leaves, some with stitched-looking designs, some with small stars that seem to whisper about distant skies. Each has a tiny handwritten tag tied with twine, describing the memory that inspired it. First snow melt, quiet kitchen after midnight, window open, rain listening, letter finally written. The tags don't tell stories aloud, they simply suggest them, leaving space for whoever lights the candle to fill in the rest. The candle carver turns the newly carved piece slightly, checking symmetry not with perfectionist scrutiny, but with affection, as though meeting the candle halfway, allowing it to become what it naturally wants. The flickering flames around the room respond in small gestures, bowing gently in different directions as the air moves. Each flame appears to have its own personality, some steady, some playful, some quiet and inward. The loft's single window, angled beneath the slope of the roof, frames the night sky in a patch of deep velvet. A crescent moon leans above the rooftops, faint and serene, while stars shimmer softly, not brilliant, not loud, just present. Sometimes, on nights like this, the candle carver imagines that every person who cannot sleep has their own quiet flame somewhere, a lamp, a candle, a clock's little glow, and that each light is part of the same silent constellation across the world, not connected by geography, but by restlessness gently slowing. Another candle waits on the table, this one poured earlier, still faintly warm. Its surface is smooth, like calm water before a ripple. The carver traces a small design lightly with a marking stick, the outline of a door, not a real door, but a symbolic one, a door that opens inward rather than outward, inviting the one who watches it burn to step into their own quiet. The blade begins again. Shavings collect like snowflakes along the corner of the bench. Each piece of wax carries within it the memory of fields where bees once wandered, of flowers bowed beneath summer light. There is something grounding about realizing that even the smallest candle begins as sunlight, translated slowly through the patient work of nature. The candlecarver pauses again, not out of fatigue, but because the night is speaking softly in its own language. A kettle simmers on the small stove in the corner. The faint hiss is like a whisper that encourages slowing even more. Soon there will be tea, chamomile with a hint of lemon peel, poured carefully into a mug that has the tiniest hairline crack down the side. The carver loves that crack, not as damage, but as quiet proof that something can continue holding warmth even after being tested. The thought brings a soft smile, not a dramatic smile, just one that barely lifts at the edges. It has always been the candlecarver's quiet belief that every person, at some point in their life, needs a place like this loft, not necessarily in wood and stone, but in spirit, a place where nothing is expected of them but being present, a place that does not insist they solve anything tonight. The dim glow of the room falls gently over an old book lying open near the window. Its pages carry handwritten notes, sketches of candle shapes, lists of wax blends, scribbled ideas for fragrances paired with moods. Lavender sandalwood, evening reflection, cedar honey, returning home, rosemary vanilla, resetting thoughts softly. The candlecarver traces a line down one page thoughtfully. The loft wasn't always this quiet. There were years when it echoed with laughter, with storytelling, with the clink of mugs and the rustle of shared notebooks on long winter evenings. Friends had gathered here to sit under the rafters and talk slowly about dreams as flickering shadows wrapped them in gentle silhouettes. Those voices, though no longer present, left a kind of echo, not haunting, but blessing. As though the wood itself remembers kindness. And perhaps that is why the loft feels so steady. It carries layers of warmth built over time, like wax poured in careful stages, each one cooling into place until the candle stands strong without ever hardening into harshness. The kettle finally finishes its quiet song. The candlecarver moves across the loft, the floorboards murmuring beneath each step. Tea is poured slowly, steam curling upward in graceful ribbons. The mug is placed beside the workbench, its warmth radiating into the night. A single breath is taken, long in, slow out, not as a technique, simply as something the body naturally chooses. On the far wall, a small wooden box sits slightly ajar. Inside rests a collection of matchbooks, each collected from different moments. Some have faint hotel logos. Some have tiny handwritten notes inside the covers. One reads, "For nights when thoughts feel too loud." The candlecarver closes the box gently, not ready to think about memories, only to let them rest. Returning to the workbench, the carver leans closer to the candle with the etched door. The blade adds the soft lines of a lantern hanging beside the doorway, echoing the framed sketch on the wall. When this candle burns, its shadows will form a delicate doorway pattern that shifts gently with the flame. And perhaps someone somewhere, watching the shadow dance on their own wall, will feel the doorway open inside them too. The doorway into peace, into quiet, into the kind of rest that doesn't judge how long it takes to arrive. Another long pause. The candle carver looks around the loft, allowing gratitude to flow without forcing it. Gratitude for the quiet, for the slow work, for the way night gently wraps the world without asking permission. Some nights bring questions, some bring reflection, but tonight seems to bring only a soft invitation. Simply be here. The candle carver accepts the invitation like one accepts a blanket, not dramatically, not ceremonially, simply by settling into it. Outside, clouds drift lazily across the moon. A dog barks once, far away, then grows silent again. Somewhere a door closes softly. Life continues, but gently. The candle carver places the finished carved candle among the others on the drying rack. Beside it, a small parchment tag is tied with tender fingers. Words are written slowly. A quiet door you can always open. The tag flutters faintly as a breeze moves through the loft. There it is, the emotional anchor for the night. Not loss, not drama. Simply the realization that sometimes what we need most isn't answers, but access. Access to a softer inner space, where thoughts unwind and burdens set themselves down. The carver sits back, the flames bow, the tea cools slowly. The loft continues breathing, and somewhere in the quiet distance, a church bell murmurs a low note into the night, reminding the world that time continues, but gently enough that it almost feels like a lullaby. The candle carver closes their eyes briefly, not to sleep, but to savor the weightless moment. When they open them again, the loft feels even softer, as if the night itself has stepped closer to sit beside the workbench. Another piece of wax is lifted, another slow carving begins, and the story of the candle carver's gentle night deepens, one peaceful stroke at a time. Morning inside the candle carver's loft arrived so softly that it hardly seemed to arrive at all. There was no clang of alarm clocks, no sudden rush of footsteps across the floorboards. Instead, the day unfolded like a gentle breath, slowly, patiently, as if even the sun understood that this was a place where nothing hurried. You awoke to the faint scent of beeswax and honeyed wood. The window, with its slightly imperfect glass panes, filtered the daylight into slow, moving ribbons of gold. These ribbons drifted across the floor, pausing at shelves, lingering over carved shapes, and resting softly upon the table where the candle carver had left tools neatly arranged. Somewhere below, The town yawned awake. A soft cartwheel rolled across cobblestones. A door quietly closed. A kettle sang faintly, carried upward by the morning air. And yet here, in the loft, time seemed to have its own quiet agreement. Move gently, speak softly. Disturb nothing that does not wish to awaken. You sat for a moment, letting your body adjust, letting your thoughts stretch like a cat in a shaft of sunlight. In your chest, the remnants of yesterday's worries fluttered, not gone yet, but quieter, as if they knew this was not the place to echo loudly. You walked slowly toward the window. Outside, rooftops wore a thin veil of frost that glimmered like sugar. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, not in straight lines, but in elegant spirals unfurling like ribbon. And down below, in the cobbled courtyard, the candlecarver was already working. He stood at an outdoor bench with a small block of wood. The sleeves of his soft sweater rolled gently up his arms. Each movement he made was careful, unforced, like a musician playing a familiar, beloved song. Tiny curls of wood fell like feathers. Beside him sat two dogs that were not really dogs, carved ones, wooden companions, their shapes softened by time and weather. They watched the candlecarver as if loyal guardians of quiet. You smiled without realizing you were smiling. The loft felt like it had been waiting for you, not expecting results, not asking you to perform or prove anything, just offering space. On the small table near the bed, a note rested beneath a seashell. The handwriting traveled across the page in soft, rounded letters. Feel at home. The kettle knows what to do. Breakfast waits when you're ready. There was no signature. There didn't need to be. You found the kettle on the stove, old and gently dented, the kind that looked like it remembered stories. When you set it on the heat, it did not hiss impatiently. Instead, it sang in quiet crescendos, as though practicing a lullaby. You poured hot water into a ceramic mug decorated with painted lanterns and watched steam rise, slow and wandering. The warmth seeped into your hands, grounding you in a way few things ever had. You sipped, and in that sip, you felt something deeper than taste. You felt permission to not rush, to not explain, to simply exist inside this morning exactly as it was. You carried the mug to the work table and looked at the unfinished candle waiting there. It was shaped like a tiny house, not yet polished, but already holding a sense of comfort. You traced the doorway with your fingertip. The wax felt cool and surprisingly alive, as if it remembered every gentle touch that shaped it. And then, softly, the door downstairs opened. Footsteps climbed the staircase, slow, steady, unfearing. The candlecarver appeared in the loft doorway. His smile was not wide or energetic. It was calm, sincere. the kind of smile that comes from someone who enjoys being exactly where they are. "Good morning," he said softly, as if speaking to the room as much as to you. "Did the loft treat you kindly?" You nodded. "It did. It feels like it knows how to take care of people." He chuckled gently. "It has practiced for many years," he replied. "Spaces remember the way we treat them. This one has been spoken to kindly, so it learned to speak kindly back." He stepped fully inside, wiping wood dust from his hands. "I thought today," he continued, "you might like to see how light learns its language." You blinked softly. His words felt like poetry, not the kind printed in books, but the kind you feel before you ever try to understand it. He motioned for you to follow him downstairs. The workshop beneath the loft felt different in daylight. Last night it had been warming, glowing, wrapped in shadows softened by candle flames. Today, gentle daylight poured through high windows, turning the floating dust motes into slow, moving constellations. Every shelf carried stories, lanterns carved with small windows, candles shaped like tiny boats, a spiral candle that twisted upward like a seashell memory, and in the center of the room sat the large wax melting pot, breathing quiet warmth into the air. The candlecarver moved as though gliding through a familiar dance. He opened a drawer and removed a spool of wick string. "Most people think the candle begins with wax," he said softly, "but it actually begins here with the wick. The wick is like a path. Without a steady path, even the gentlest flame can become lost." He placed the wick in your hand. It felt lighter than you expected, almost fragile. Overthinking is like a flame that tries to wander everywhere at once. He continued, "A good wick invites the flame to stay focused, not burning too fast, not flickering wildly." He smiled gently. "It teaches the flame to be calm." Something inside you softened, as though those words had been meant for much more than candles. He showed you how to dip the wick into the melted wax, slowly, with patience. The wax wrapped around the string like a warm blanket, embracing a cold evening. You lifted the wick, watching droplets gather, then still. "Again," he whispered. So you dipped and lifted and waited. The process was repetitive. Dip, lift, cool, breathe. Each layer of wax built gently upon the last, without forcing anything faster than it was ready to be. A thought surfaced slowly in your mind, not loud, not intrusive, but gentle. This is what healing might feel like. Not an instant change, not a dramatic moment, simply layers of warmth added patiently, layer after layer, day after day. The candlecarver watched quietly, his presence supportive, but never hovering. You realized he had the rare kind of patience that does not need praise or acknowledgement. He simply enjoyed watching calm take shape. When the candle grew thicker, he guided you to a shaping table. He handed you a small wooden tool, its handle worn smooth by years of use. "Light likes gentle edges," he said. "Sharpness makes it nervous." You carved softly, rounding the base, smoothing the sides. The room filled with the quiet sound of wax whispering beneath the tool. And as you shaped the candle, something unexpected happened. Your breathing matched its rhythm. Long, unhurried inhales, soft, easy exhales. The world outside, deadlines, conversations, uncertainties, faded into a distant hush. Here, there was only wax, warm light, soft carving, and the presence of a man who made peace feel like craft work. When the shaping was done, the candlecarver placed your creation on a small wooden stand. He lit it. The flame rose gently, not snapping, not spitting, just existing in a steady, calm glow. You watched entranced. "It listens," he said quietly. "Every candle has a way of listening, not to words, but to how a person is feeling when they sit beside it." You swallowed lightly. "What does it hear from me?" He tilted his head, considering. "It hears someone who has carried too many thoughts for too long." He replied gently. "But it also hears someone learning, little by little, that not every thought needs to be carried forever." You felt tears touch the edges of your eyes. Not heavy tears, not painful ones, just the soft kind, releasing kind. He did not comment on them. He didn't tell you it will be okay or you're safe now. He simply let the tears exist and let the candle burn. And somehow, that was better than reassurance, because the room itself seemed to hold you. The wood, the light, the quiet air. Everything said, without speaking, "You are allowed to be gentle with yourself here." Later, while the candle cooled, the candlecarver invited you outside. Behind the workshop stretched a quiet courtyard, enclosed by weathered stone walls, softened by climbing ivy. A bench rested beneath a small tree, whose leaves chimed softly when touched by breeze. In the corner stood shelves lined with jars, honey-colored, amber, pale cream. Each jar contained melted wax from old candles. "These," he said, tapping one gently, "are memories." You looked closer. Tiny labels hung from each jar, dates or simple words. Winter evening, first snow, quiet apology, returning home. "What do you do with them?" you asked. He smiled softly. "I give them new shapes." He lifted one jar, quiet apology, and held it to the light. Inside, the wax seemed to glow more softly than the others. "When something ends," he continued, "its warmth doesn't disappear. It simply waits for another form." He set the jar down, and for a moment, his eyes reflected the same quiet light as the wax. You felt a peaceful realization bloom. Pain from the past, Thoughts that once felt sharp and tangled, maybe they did not have to disappear completely. Maybe they could be softened, reshaped, gently transformed into something that carried warmth instead of weight. You sat on the courtyard bench. The candle carver poured water into 2 cups and joined you, the day stretching around both of you like a warm, loose blanket. Birds flitted atop the ivy-covered walls. The tree whispered. A bee wandered lazily from flower to flower. No deep conversation was needed. No analysis. No rush to fix or diagnose. Just shared silence, respectful, spacious, and full. And as the morning slowly turned to afternoon, you realized something. It had been a very long time since silence had felt like a friend. Eventually, the candle carver stood. "Come," he said gently. "Your candle is ready." Back inside, your candle waited upon the workbench like a small, patient companion. He wrapped it carefully in soft paper, tied with thin twine. But instead of handing it to you, he placed it on a shelf reserved for candles waiting for night. "It has work to do later," he said softly. "Not yet." You felt no impatience, only a quiet curiosity. Your mind, once restless, felt like it had slowed to the same comfortable rhythm as the workshop itself. He gestured toward the stairs. "Rest in the loft a while," he suggested. "Let the day pass gently. There is more light to meet when evening returns." You nodded. Climbing the stairs, you noticed that each step seemed to creak in the same pattern, almost like a lullaby the wood sang beneath every foot that climbed it. Back in the loft, afternoon light filtered through the window, turning from gold to soft amber. You lay down for a moment, not planning to sleep, just to rest. Your eyes fell upon the beams overhead, the old nails, the anchored sturdiness of everything built with care. And as your breathing found an easy rhythm, the faint candle scent cradled your senses. Your last clear thought before drifting into a light, peaceful doze was simply, "Hera, I don't have to hold everything at once." And the loft, the old beams, the silent lanterns, they seemed to answer back, "Rest. There's time. Let the world be gentle with you." The day continued quietly, folding around you like soft fabric, and the candle carver's world, filled with glowing patience, waited for night to bring its next layer of warmth. Evening did not simply arrive in the candle carver's town. It gathered. It gathered in the corners of streets, where lanterns waited patiently to be lit. It gathered along rooftops, where shadows softened into deep blues. It gathered inside windows, where gentle lamps stitched warm patches onto the quiet dusk. And inside the candle carver's loft, evening arrived the way a lullaby appears, not suddenly, not loudly, but like a soft tide touching shore. You awoke from your light afternoon rest feeling as if your thoughts had been wrapped in cotton. Everything seemed slower, rounder, quieter. The sky beyond the window had slipped into twilight, painted with streaks of lavender and fading rose. A faint chill lingered in the air, not unpleasant, the kind of coolness that makes warm light feel even warmer. Somewhere below, a match struck, the faintest sound, the smallest whisper of flame, and then the house seemed to exhale. You rose, drawn by an instinct deeper than curiosity. Your footsteps were slow, each one absorbing the softness of the wood underfoot. The staircase welcomed you with its familiar sleepy creak. The workshop below glowed again, but differently than before. Not the morning's open brightness, not the night's deep amber. This was the hour in between, when light becomes memory. Lanterns along the shelves had been lit one by one, each flame resting inside carved designs like a calm heartbeat. The floating specks of dust glowed softly, moving through the air like tiny drifting constellations. And there, in the center of the workshop, the candlecarver stood with your candle. He didn't look up immediately. He watched the flame, giving it his full attention, the way one listens to the first notes of a gentle song. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the warmth of both fire and patience. Twilight is when candles say the most. You joined him quietly, standing beside the workbench. Your candle burned with an unusual calmness. The flame neither leaned nor flickered. It simply lifted upward, steady as a promise that didn't need to be spoken. He gestured to a chair. "Sit," he said softly. "Let it speak." You sat slowly, feeling the subtle comfort of being guided without being commanded. The candle's glow painted the table, the tools, the walls, your hands. It softened every line, erased every edge. Even your thoughts seemed to take on its warmth, losing their sharp outlines and fading into gentler shapes. "Do you know?" the candlecarver said after a moment, "that every person who comes here believes they are too much." You looked at him, surprised. Too loud, too quiet, too emotional, too distant, too worried. He listed them softly, as though they were fragile leaves being laid gently onto water. Almost none arrived, saying, "I am exactly enough." He smiled gently. "I believe that is why the candles listen. They have no judgment. They only reflect. And when someone sits with them long enough, they begin to see themselves the way the flame sees them, not as a problem to be solved, but as a light learning how to rest." You let his words absorb into you like warmth into cold hands. Your life outside this loft felt far away, not erased, just distant. You remembered moments where your mind had raced late into the night, replaying conversations, worrying over decisions, rehearsing imaginary futures. And yet, Here, none of those thoughts brought urgency with them. They appeared softly like visitors, then faded into the candle's glow. "Why candles?" you asked gently. "Why not something else?" He paused, considering the question as though turning it carefully in his hands. "Because candles vanish slowly," he said. "They don't cling to their shape. They don't fight their purpose. They give warmth. They offer light. And then they become smaller and smaller, until all that remains is the memory of their glow." He glanced at your candle. "I suppose," he added softly, "they remind us that letting go can be beautiful." You watched the tiny trail of wax beginning to pool at the base of the wick, soft and gentle, reshaping itself as it melted. Not destruction, transformation. He stood and moved toward the shelf lined with jars, the memory jars you'd seen earlier in the courtyard. Tonight, however, they looked different. Their surfaces caught the lantern light, reflecting soft amber hues across the walls. Some jars glowed faintly, warmed from within even though no flame touched them. He took down a jar labeled simply, "A Long Journey." He placed it on the table beside your candle and opened it carefully. The subtle aroma of old honey and faint smoke drifted out, comforting, nostalgic like an evening remembered. "This," he said, "was once a candle in a lighthouse far from here. A traveler brought it to me when the wick finally gave out." He said, "It had guided countless boats safely to shore." He dipped a small spoon inside, scooping out a piece of the preserved wax. "The traveler didn't want the light to disappear entirely. He didn't ask me to preserve the candle exactly as it was. He asked me to give its purpose another shape." You listened, feeling the truth of the story settle gently in your chest. He melted the fragment over a tiny flame, letting it blend with a new base of warm wax. And slowly, he poured it into a mold shaped like a lantern. "That is what we rarely understand about our past," he said quietly. "We try to erase it, or we try to hold it unchanged. Neither brings peace. What brings peace is shaping it into something that lights the present." The words washed over you, soft and steady. Maybe your own memories didn't need to disappear. Maybe they could glow differently, not as reminders of pain, but as proof of resilience, of learning, of small survivals gathered over time. He set the new mold aside. "It will rest," he said. "Like all of us, it needs time to cool before it can understand its new form." Later, he invited you back upstairs. The loft had changed with the night. Shadows stretched softly across the ceiling beams. The window framed the first few stars as they began to appear, slow, patient, unburdened by urgency. A faint breeze slipped through the slightly open pane, carrying the scent of distant pine and chimney smoke. A single candle burned on the table, and beside it lay a leather-bound book. He motioned to it. "This is the loft of letters," he said. "People who stay here sometimes write something before they leave. Not instructions, not confessions. Simply a thought that wants to rest somewhere safe." You opened the book with gentle curiosity. Inside were pages filled with different handwritings, some neat, some uneven, some written as though the writer had cried softly while writing. "I learned how to slow down here. I remembered that I am allowed to be gentle with myself. I came carrying questions. I leave carrying quiet." Each entry was short but heavy in meaning, not sharp heavy, but like a weighted blanket, grounding, real, supportive. You turned pages slowly, feeling as if you were listening to echoes of others who had once sat in this same quiet. The candlecarver's voice drifted from nearby. "You don't need to write now," he said softly. "Only when a sentence finds you, not before." You closed the book with care. A calm silence followed, not empty silence, but full silence, the kind filled with distant nighttime sounds, an owl somewhere far away, a door gently closing across the street, the faint lull of wind brushing rooftops. Your eyes softened, not with fatigue exactly, but with a deep relaxation that had been missing from your life for so long. The candlecarver placed a folded blanket at the foot of the bed. "Tonight," he said gently, "let the loft keep the thoughts for you. If one appears, simply give it to the room. It knows where to store them." You smiled softly at the idea, the room as a keeper of thoughts, collecting them like small feathers and setting them somewhere peaceful. He moved toward the stairs. "Sleep doesn't always arrive when called," he added kindly, pausing at the doorway. "But rest always will, and rest is patient. Rest waits beside you until you're ready." Then he left, closing the door partway, enough for privacy, but not so much that the room felt closed off. You lay beneath the blanket, feeling its gentle weight across your chest. The ceiling beams above looked steady, ancient, reassuring, like guardians of quiet nights. Your mind wandered, but it wandered softly now, like a traveler walking slow paths at dusk, rather than racing through storms. Thoughts rose and fell the way waves roll across a calm shore. Moments from your life appeared, times you had felt overwhelmed, times you'd held everything together while no one noticed how heavy it was. But instead of anxiety, there was understanding. You imagined those memories as wax, being melted down gently, turned softer kender. Perhaps they too were learning to glow differently. Outside, the stars stitched themselves deeper into the sky. A distant bell chimed from somewhere in the town, not loudly, just enough to remind you that even time was moving gently here. The candle on the table flickered, not restlessly but like a soft breathing, and gradually your eyes began to drift closed, not forced, not commanded, just closing because the world finally felt safe enough. At some unmarked point in the night, you woke just barely to the sound of the candlecarver's soft footsteps. He moved so quietly you might have mistaken him for part of a dream. He checked the candle's flame, trimmed the wick with almost reverent care, and made sure the open window let in only the gentlest breeze. Then, before turning to leave, he whispered, not toward you directly, but toward the room. "Let them rest well." The words were barely audible, but the loft heard, the walls heard, the beams heard, and perhaps your heart heard too, because very soon after, you slipped back into sleep, deeper this time, wrapped in the warmth of candlelight, supported by an unseen softness that asked nothing from you except to breathe. Just breathe, slowly, gently, peacefully. And the world outside the loft, whatever it had been demanding before, waited patiently beyond the night. Morning did not wake you. It arrived around you. It settled over the loft like a delicate shawl woven from pale gold light and slow, moving time. It touched the beams overhead first, then drifted across the floor in soft ribbons, warming the edges of the wooden boards until they glowed. You opened your eyes gently, as though waking inside a memory you didn't want to disturb. Nothing rushed you, nothing demanded anything. You lay for a while, listening, not the kind of listening that strained for sound, but the kind that simply allowed whatever wished to be heard to exist. A sparrow somewhere outside, a distant cart rolling quietly down a street, the faint whisper of wind brushing against the window pane, and beneath it all, the steady softness of your own breathing. You realized, with a calm sort of surprise, that you hadn't awakened from restless spinning thoughts or jolted from uneasy dreams. You had drifted up from sleep the same way a leaf rises slowly towards sunlight on a still pond. You sat up, stretching your hands forward, letting them rest in the warmth pooling across the bed. The candle from the night before had finished burning. A small disc of cooled wax sat at its base, smooth, delicate, complete, as though it had chosen this exact shape with quiet dignity. You touched it lightly and smiled. Nothing harsh happened. It didn't break. It simply existed perfectly enough. Downstairs, you heard a small sound, not loud, but unmistakably cheerful. The candlecarver humming. A gentle tune without urgency, shaped by contentment rather than intent. It floated upward through the floorboards, and you found yourself smiling before you even realized it. When you descended the stairs, the workshop greeted you with a glow that felt awake rather than merely lit. Sunlight filtered through the windows, soft as powdered gold. The lanterns were extinguished now, but they still held traces of warmth in their glass, like memories of the night that had passed peacefully. The candlecarver looked up and nodded, eyes bright yet gentle. "Morning," he said, just the one word, but spoken as if he were offering it, not announcing it. You took a seat at the same workbench where your candle had been carved, noticing how different it felt in daylight. The wood seemed to retain stories in its grain, though none of them asked to be told. How did the loft treat you? The question carried no pressure to impress, no expectation that you should say the night had changed your life. It was simply curiosity wrapped in care. "It felt safe," you replied quietly. He nodded once, not as validation, but as shared understanding. "Safety doesn't mean nothing ever hurts," he said gently. "It means nothing has to be faced alone." He returned to his tools, not to withdraw from conversation, but to continue it in the language of hands and patient movements. His knife glided carefully along the side of another candle, shaving thin curls that fell softly to the table. Each curl landed silently, like a tiny exhale. As the morning unfolded, you noticed something subtle. The workshop wasn't just a place where candles were made. It was a place where slowness was honored. Nothing in the room hurried, yet everything progressed. Wax cooled, wicks waited, wood grain held time gently. You felt an impulse to ask about the town beyond the workshop, its people, their traditions, their lives. But the candlecarver surprised you by speaking first. "Would you like to walk with me today?" His tone made it sound less like a plan and more like an invitation to experience another layer of the same calm. "Yes," you said, without thinking, and felt relief in the simplicity of that single word. He wrapped a soft shawl lightly around your shoulders before you stepped outside. "Even gentle mornings can have a cool breeze," he said with a small smile. The town greeted you as though it had been quietly waiting. Stone paths warmed in the sunlight, fountains whispered. Shutters opened with slow creaks, like yawns of wooden houses stretching after sleep. People moved with unhurried grace, greeting one another with nods rather than interruptions. You sensed something in their expressions, not perfect contentment, but something steadier. Trust in the rhythm of slow days. The candlecarver led you toward the northern edge of the town, where a low hill rose above the rooftops. A narrow path wound upward, bordered by grass that swayed gently like quiet applause. At the top sat a bench, hand-carved, polished smooth by years of peaceful visitors. He gestured for you to sit. From this gentle height, the town looked like a living lantern, roofs catching sunlight the way flames catch breath, streets weaving together like soft threads holding the place together. And beyond it stretched into countryside, rolling meadows, a distant line of forest, quiet roads that seemed to promise journeys, yet never demanded them. "This is where I come," he said softly, "when I want to remember that the world continues, even when I don't try to steer it. You let the wind brush gently across your face. For a moment your mind tried to reach for worries, things undone, plans unfinished, responsibilities waiting beyond the horizon. But each thought arrived less urgently than before, as if softened by the morning. They appeared, acknowledged themselves, then dissolved into the quiet. People often believe rest is earned," he continued. "But rest isn't payment. Rest is foundation. Without it, even good intentions collapse under their own weight." You watched sunlight ripple across the distant fields. He wasn't lecturing. He wasn't teaching. He was sharing the pace of his heart, and you were simply allowed to listen. Later, when you returned to the workshop, a gentle surprise awaited. A small candle sat on the bench, not yours. This one had been carved into the subtle shape of two cupped hands, not holding anything, simply open. "And this?" you asked softly. He lifted it carefully, turning it so the light could travel across the curves. "This is for those who come here believing they must carry everything alone," he said. "When they are ready, they light it, and imagine placing one worry inside the space between the hands, just for a while." He set it back down. "Not given away," he added, "just shared." You felt the thought settle into you with quiet clarity. Maybe rest didn't mean abandoning responsibility. Maybe it meant allowing space between the tasks, breathing room where peace could sit for a while. He offered you a small brush, soft bristled, delicate. "Would you like to smooth the edges?" Your chest warmed at the invitation, not because the task was important, but because it was offered with trust. You brushed gently along the carved curves, watching the candle's surface become satin, smooth beneath your careful movements. It was the first task in a long while that demanded so little and yet carried so much presence. Your hands worked slowly. Your breathing matched the rhythm. Your mind stayed near, not racing elsewhere. You didn't have to be perfect. You only had to be here. Time passed the way sunlight moves across a room, gradually, quietly, lovingly. By afternoon, the workshop shelves had welcomed new candles, lantern shapes, stars, simple pillars, softly carved hearts. And somewhere among them, your candle rested, still and finished, like a small promise asleep inside wax. The Candlecarver brewed tea with delicate herbs. The steam carried the aroma of chamomile, honey, and something gently citrus, like memory brightened by kindness. You sat together, not as master and visitor, not as teacher and student, but simply as two people sharing quiet. He looked toward the stairs, toward the loft above. "Tonight will be gentler still," he said. "Nights often deepen once the heart has remembered what calm feels like." You nodded, not needing further explanation. There are moments, you realized, when explanation only interrupts peace. When night returned, it felt different from the night before. Not deeper, not quieter, more familiar. As if darkness itself had become a companion rather than an absence of light. The candlecarver lit the lamps slowly, each flame placed with intention, each lantern set at just the right angle to spread warmth rather than brightness. Then he carried one special lantern upstairs, an amber one carved with swirling patterns like drifting clouds. He placed it near the bed. "This lantern," he said softly, "is made from wax gathered from candles that once burned during peaceful endings, moments when someone finally allowed themselves to rest." You watched the amber glow fill the loft, softening the air, wrapping the corners in honey-colored light. "What do you want it to remind me of?" you asked. Night had completed its quiet work around the town. The market stalls had long been covered. The stones of the square held the last whisper of the day's warmth. Windows glowed faintly like drowsy eyes, and chimneys exhaled thin strands of silver smoke that vanished into the sky. Up here in the loft, the world seemed even softer. The air had grown cooler, and the wooden beams above felt almost protective, like the curved ribs of a small wooden boat floating on a still lake. The candles Arlen had finished carving rested along the old workbench, waiting, patient and humble, as though they already understood their future purpose. He didn't rush to light them. There was no need to hurry anything in this place. He simply moved at the rhythm the evening offered. A rhythm that was slower than thought, slower than worry, slower than any list of unfinished tasks. He placed a linen cloth over one section of the table, smoothing out the folds. Then he gathered a few shavings from the carved wax, thin curls the color of cream, and set them aside. Even those small pieces carried a faint, gentle scent, like honey warmed just enough to soften. The room breathed. A breeze drifted through the slightly open window, bringing the cool fragrance of night, damp stone, distant fields, and a trace of sea salt from somewhere far beyond the town. It moved across the loft and touched the candles, causing their wicks to sway slightly, almost as if nodding. Arlen leaned on the windowsill for a moment. From here, he could see rooftops layered in dark shapes against the sky. Lamps burned behind curtains, then disappeared as people turned them out one by one. A dog curled beside a door, A bicycle leaned quietly against a fence. Somewhere down the hill, a bell chimed softly, not to demand attention, but to remind the night of its own gentle presence. He let the quiet seep into him. He had always believed that silence was not empty. It was full of unspoken conversations, the kind you could only hear when you were finally tired enough or peaceful enough to listen. He closed the window halfway, allowing only the softest thread of wind to continue its way inside. Then he turned back to the candles. Each one was slightly different, some tall and slender, some shorter and round, some carved with winding lines that wrapped around like river paths. But they shared the same texture, the same patient glow beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened. He took the first candle and set it upon the low table in the center of the loft. The ceramic dish beneath it had belonged to another century, its glaze worn smooth by countless hands. He struck a match. The sound was quiet, a gentle scratch, and then a soft sigh of flame. He touched the flame to the wick. The candle accepted the spark, flickered, hesitated, then settled into a steady glow. A warm light spilled outward, brushing the walls and floor, softening edges and blurring shadows. Another candle followed, then another. He placed them in modest clusters around the loft. Not too many, just enough that each one had space to breathe. Soon the room felt wrapped in a cocoon of amber light. The beams above looked deeper. The old wood floor shone with a soft sheen. The shelves, with their jars of wax and ribbons and simple tools, seemed almost like a quiet library of gentle secrets. Arlen sat down. He didn't pick up any tools. He didn't start a new candle. He simply rested his hands together and watched the flames sway in their own slow dance. There was something healing about watching a candle. It asked nothing. It judged nothing. It simply existed, warm, present, alive in the gentlest way imaginable. His thoughts began to dissolve into slower shapes. He remembered the first time he had ever carved a candle. He had been young, unsure, and afraid of breaking the delicate wax. His mentor, an old woman with laugh lines and patient eyes, had stood behind him and said, "Wax remembers the warmth of the hands that shape it." He hadn't understood it then, but he understood it now. He believed that objects carried traces of the people who touched them, small echoes, kindness layered into physical form. And in these candles, carved for those who carried heavy thoughts, he placed calm, attention, and the quiet wish that each flame might soften one long-held worry. The loft creaked gently as it adjusted to the cooling night. Arlen shifted slightly and drew a blanket over his legs. The fabric was woven and thick, with the faint scent of lavender. Outside, the sky deepened further, until stars appeared like delicate pinpricks of distant light. He watched them through the window gap. They didn't shout. They didn't shimmer with urgency. They simply stayed, patient and still, as though they understood the language of time better than anyone on earth. He wondered who, tonight, would receive the candles he had finished. Perhaps a woman who found her mind racing the moment she lay down. Perhaps an elderly man who kept reliving moments long past. Perhaps someone young, learning for the first time that thoughts could feel too loud at night. He didn't need to know. It was enough to trust that light found its way. He leaned back into his chair, letting his breath slow naturally. Each inhale felt smoother, each exhale lengthened like a ribbon unspooling. The loft felt like a sanctuary now, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Everything inside had a place. Nothing tried to be more than it was, and slowly the world outside faded further. The town's last lights dimmed. A final cart rolled down the cobbled lane. A door closed softly, a latch gently clicked, and then silence. The quiet wasn't empty, it was full. Full of unspoken gratitude. Full of night birds that sang only when no one else was listening. Full of the deep, restful silence that comes only after long days have finally laid themselves down. Arlen rested his eyes for a moment, not fully asleep, but drifting between awareness and something softer. His thoughts slowed into images, the glow of wax, the curve of carved lines, the peaceful rhythm of small flames. He opened his eyes again after a while and smiled faintly. Everything felt ready. Not finished in the way work is finished, but ready in the way hearts sometimes are, when they finally allow themselves to rest. He moved quietly, as though not to disturb the air itself, and blew out a few of the candles he had lit. He left only one near the window, a small, steady flame that seemed to nod softly to the night beyond. The loft dimmed into a warm twilight of shadows and hush. He lay down on the small bed tucked beneath the slanted roof. The mattress sank gently, accepting his shape. The blanket folded around him like a gentle embrace. The pillow carried the subtle chill of linen that quickly warmed beneath his cheek. For a moment, he watched the last candle through half-lidded eyes. Its glow painted a small, glowing circle onto the ceiling. The flame swayed, breathed, and stilled, swayed and stilled again, as if synchronized with something deeper and older than breath. He let his thoughts drift, not chasing them, not resisting them. They floated like soft leaves on slow water, carried effortlessly towards somewhere quiet. He remembered the first time someone had thanked him for a candle. It had been a simple messagey. Your candle kept me company when my thoughts wouldn't. He hadn't known what to say in reply. not because he didn't care, but because the words felt bigger than conversation. They felt like a small miracle, that something so delicate, shaped quietly in a loft above a sleeping town, could ease someone's lonely night. He carried that memory like a lantern, and now, as sleep began to settle into his limbs, he understood something even more deeply. He was not really carving candles. He was carving restful spaces inside moments, soft pauses for wandering minds, a gentle invitation to slow down. Outside, the clouds drifted past the moon. The candle gently lowered its flame, the way someone lowers their voice into a whisper. And the loft, this quiet, wooden refuge, seemed to lean into the night itself, becoming part of the stillness that wrapped the town. Arlen's breathing softened. The edges of the world blurred. Thoughts that once might have tried to return simply dissolved before they arrived, finding no reason to linger. His shoulders loosened, his jaw released, his fingers curled naturally at his sides. He whispered a small good night, not to anyone in particular, but to everything in the room, the beams, the unfinished candles, the old workbench, the window that let the night in gently. Then he closed his eyes fully, and the candle, still flickering near the window, became the quiet guardian of the loft, a gentle watcher that offered no urgency, only presence. Its glow softened further, the breeze slowed, the night deepened into its calmest hour, and inside the gentle candlecarver's loft, the world finally rested. The night has settled completely now. Somewhere beyond the windows of the world, the hours have grown softer, and time has begun to slow in that quiet way it does when everything is finally safe enough to rest. You are no longer walking through the loft. You are simply resting inside the feeling of it. The candlelight of this story lingers like a memory, not bright, not demanding, just a warm, steady glow that drifts into the gentle corners of the mind. The soft wooden beams, the calm scent of wax and honey, the hush of night pressing kindly against the roof. They stay with you not as pictures, but as sensations. Slow, peaceful, unhurried, like a small lantern placed at the edge of sleep. The world outside your thoughts is quiet now. There is nothing you need to fix, nothing you must solve, nothing that requires your attention until morning opens slowly and kindly in its own time. Here, in this soft space between waking and dreaming, everything that felt heavy can set itself down for a while. You can let your breath become simple again, in and out, the way the tide gently moves toward the shore and then slips back again, leaving smooth sand behind. You might notice that your body feels heavier in the best possible way, not burdened, but deeply supported. The muscles around your eyes loosen. The space across your forehead smooths. Your hands relax into whatever they're touching. Your shoulders soften, almost of their own choosing. The candlecarver's loft fades, yet the calm you found there remains. It has followed you out of the story, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a soft blanket laid across the mind. The gentle belief that rest is allowed. That night is not an opponent to fight, but a friend who comes quietly to hold things for a while. Every thought that tries to rise becomes lighter. It drifts, it floats, and the deeper you drift, the more the story becomes simply background comfort, like a distant glow that doesn't need to be remembered in detail to continue soothing you. If the mind wanders, that's okay. If dreams begin, that's okay. If there is only soft darkness and quiet, that is okay too. Sleep arrives not because you force it, but because here, there is finally enough space for it. You are safe to rest. You are safe to soften. You are safe to let this night hold the pieces you don't need to carry. And somewhere, in a quiet loft above a peaceful town, a single candle still burns gently, not to keep you awake, but to remind you, even in dreams, that light can be soft and warmth can be patient and peace can arrive quietly. Let yourself drift slowly, deeper, down into the calm. The night is here to watch over you, and you can sleep now.